Welcome to another movie plot. It begins with a close-up of an antique puzzle box called the Lament Configuration. The thrill-seeker Frank's finally reached the limits that all of Earth's pleasures can provide him and seeks anything else. He purchases the box from an old Chinese dealer who says it'll open doors to both heaven and hell. So not caring as to which, he returns with it to America, where he begins to solve its riddle. The panels shift into place, opening a rift into a dimension called the Labyrinth, or more commonly Hell. A being called a Cenobite calmly enters, before we skip Frank's wild night and jump straight to him scattered around the room in tiny pieces. The most decorated priest in hell, Pinhead, joins just to close the box and return the room to its original state. Sometime later, Frank's brother Larry and wife Julia is looking to move back into the house. They find evidence that Frank's been squatting there, but just assume that he's on another one of his benders. When Larry gets a call from his daughter Kirsty asking how the new house is treating them. Her stepmother Julia looks around some more and finds pictures of Frank with dozens of women. She remembers her last encounter with him the night of her wedding, when the two began to have an affair behind Larry's back despite still marrying him. Julia pockets one of the pictures after tearing out the other woman, and they begin moving in within the week. Larry's helping a pair of removalists who give his wife the creeps and stare at his daughter when she arrives. In his distraction, Larry wipes his hand right across a loose nail, cutting himself and leaking a ridiculous amount of blood onto the floorboards of the upstairs. Julia needs to drive the nauseous Larry to the hospital herself, and while they're gone, Larry's blood sucks through the floor and begins to give life to his brother. That night the trio have dinner with family friends while Julia is the only one not enjoying herself. But upstairs, Frank's managed to pull himself back together, although the Cenobites still retain his flesh. Julia excuses herself from her mundane life and goes into the attic to remember Frank once again, when he grabs her and says not to look at him, but it's a bit hard to avoid. Julia is quick to believe that it's her beloved and is convinced that she needs to spill more blood to rejuvenate the rest of him. When Kirsty rounds the corner, she comes face to face with her stepmother, but is probably saved by the arrival of her boyfriend. Steve walks Kirsty home when they briefly exchange glances with a derelict man who seems to be watching them. That night, Kirsty has a dream of her father Larry lying under a sheet covered in blood and wakes up in a sweat. She calls him, but Larry says that he's fine and to just go to bed, while Frank listens from the top of the stairs and hears every conversation the family has. The next day, Julia gets dressed up and goes to a bar to search for a sacrifice. She picks up a desperate stranger and takes him back to her house with the supposed intention of sharing a drink in private, but he begins to get suspicious when the woman leads him to the attic, which lacks any comfort. He still begins to get ready, but when his back's turned, Julia grabs a hammer and bludgeons the stranger to death. Then while Frank gets the blood he needs to rejuvenate himself, Julia goes to the bathroom and gets cleaned up. She returns to find the man flayed and Frank's flesh beginning to return, albeit a little gooey. He requests that Julia kill another person so that he can become whole and leave before the Cenobites find out that he's escaped their realm. Larry arrives back home and calls out to his wife, so Julia says she'll be down in a minute, then goes back to sucking on Frank's skinless finger in the meantime. Meanwhile, Kirsty's working at a pet shop and discovers the derelict in the back eating all of the crickets. She kicks him out and he calmly leaves, but when Steve startles her, the strange man's suddenly gone. That night, Julia brings her second victim to the house and kills this one without any remorse, as she's begun to enjoy it. Frank looks the same but is now able to taste and explains by letting the Lament Configuration reveal his exploits. Despite being killed by them, he says that the Cenobites delivered him both limitless pleasure and pains beyond what he could handle, as if he still enjoyed every minute of it. Julia is shocked by what she's seen, but she still agrees to help Frank escape. After all, she is willing to suck his finger. Later that night, Larry's watching boxing and is surprised that Julia is not disgusted by it like usual, but she's seen and done a lot worse in recent days. Suddenly Larry hears Frank banging on the wall and goes to check it out, so Julia distracts him by claiming it's just an open window and leading her husband to the bedroom. Before they go anywhere, Frank emerges from the closet with a knife and begins skinning a rat in a threatening manner. Julia shouts out that she can't take it anymore, so Frank backs away, but Larry thinks he's done something wrong and is left to take a cold shower. The next day, the walking corpse demands another body from Julia if she isn't going to sacrifice her husband. No. Meanwhile, Larry's at a restaurant and talking to Kirsty about Julia's recent attitude, assuming she's just lonely. He asks his daughter to stop by the house and try to make friends with her, but Kirsty discovers her stepmother bringing a stranger into her house. She takes him upstairs to the attic where the lonely man's expecting to get lucky until seeing Frank. Julia gives him a whack, but the man doesn't go down, until Frank pushes Julia out of the way and begins to forcefully take the man's blood. Kirsty enters the house and walks upstairs while Julia hides and leaves her to Frank. She comes across the half-mutilated man, who's swiftly finished off by Frank before he goes at Kirsty. He gets really creepy with his niece until she punches his frail stomach and grabs the nearest thing to throw at him. When Kirsty sees that the item's important to Frank, she throws it out the window and runs away, picking up the lament configuration on her way out and collapsing in the street to be found by passers-by. She wakes up sometime later at the hospital and wants to call her father, but the doctor insists that she gets back into bed. He produces the puzzle box, but Kirsty has no memory of it or how she got to the hospital. When Doc exits, he leaves the artifact and Kirsty stays up all night cracking it out of boredom, only to have the wall open up with a rift called a schism into the Cenobite labyrinth. Kirsty enters to find an unfriendly Cenobite creature hanging upside down called the Engineer. It chases her with its scorpion-like tail back into the hospital where the wall closes, but its shrieks are still heard. She struggles to get the box closed, but Pinhead's gash arrives before she can, and his muscle the Chatterer sticks his finger in Kirsty's mouth right off the bat. We're introduced to the gash's final Cenobite, Butterball, who just stands around. Pinhead describes themselves as explorers in the further regions of experience, and assures Kirsty that there's no possible way Frank could have escaped from the labyrinth. Kirsty makes the Hell Priest a deal to lead him to Frank in exchange to not be pleasured to death, and Pinhead wants to hear him confess himself, so he agrees with the threat to tear Kirsty's soul out should she fail. Meanwhile, Julia's afraid that Kirsty's going to tell Larry everything, but he arrives home first. The evil wife just has to tell him to follow her upstairs, and we never see Larry again, just Frank wearing his skin as a suit. Kirsty manages to sneak out of the hospital before Steve can visit her and runs all the way to her father's. Julia answers the door and reluctantly lets Kirsty inside, but her uncle's already fully covered in her father. He pretends that he killed Frank and that everything is going to be okay now, but Kirsty's worried about what she started with Hell's Army. She wants to see the body and gets shown to the attic where her own father Larry lies dead. Suddenly Pinhead's gash appears and demands to have the murderer responsible, but Kirsty believes they're talking about her father. She runs downstairs past her psychotic roadblock of a stepmother to warn her father they need to leave. But Frank says the same creepy lines that he said earlier, giving himself away. Kirsty scratches some of the mask off and tries escape, but is restrained by Julia for Frank to stab. But he accidentally misses when she moves and kills Julia. Blood's still blood, and while he's busy absorbing Julia, Kirsty runs upstairs and hides in a cupboard next to a corpse filled with maggots. She remains silent until Frank leaves, then comes out crying, assuming that the coast is clear. But he was just waiting in the opposite room with his knife and backs her up until Kirsty trips over her father. She's finally now able to feel upset about Larry, when the lights from the schism begin to illuminate the room. The Cenobites appear and confront Frank, who tries to lie about his identity, but the Hell Priestess just needs a single word to confirm that he's Frank. Pinhead tells Kirsty to leave as it's about to get bloody, and Frank tries to stab her for setting him up, but hooks extend from the shadows and all hold him in place with the flesh stretched out. Uncle Frank's final words are that Jesus wept before being torn apart for the second time. Kirsty tries to escape, but the Cenobites renege on their deal and want Kirsty as well. She finds Julia now faceless and chained to the bed, holding the lament configuration in her hands. Trying to solve it to send them home, Pinhead says that they have such sights to show her, but Kirsty's got so fast with the puzzle box that she sends them all back to Hell one by one. The house starts to collapse as Kirsty's almost grabbed by Hell's right-hand man, but quickly returns him home. Steve gets to the house and is almost killed by Butterball, but he's crushed under a falling beam. Before the couple can escape, a schism to the labyrinth allows the Engineer access to the house. It reaches for the drop lament configuration, but Kirsty manages to beat it and send the final Cenobite back to Hell. Afterwards, the couple go to a random field filled with a scattering of burning objects, which is presumably the site of the house. Kirsty throws the puzzle box into a fire, unaware that it's immune, when the derelict man shows up and walks into the flames to take it back. He catches on fire and reveals himself to be a bone dragon that flies away with the portal to Hell. The final scene shows the Chinese dealer selling the box to another man who's reached the limits that Earth's pleasures can provide. And the movie ends.
You want a cookie, little girl?